hope everyone's doing well today. So today, I want to talk to you about the link between autoimmune disease and some hidden infections and chronic fatigue. So we all go through life, and as we're on this health and wellness journey, there's different things that can affect us. And one of the things is really our energy and kind of aches and pains. And it's important to understand that there's a lot of things that can be going on, and it's important to consider these things if this is truly a chronic problem for you. So, I want to talk a little bit about your immune system and how it can impact us, both good and bad. So your immune system really protects you against kind of foreign invaders like bacteria and viruses. And really it does this by destroying them. Now, usually your immune system can differentiate between your foreign cells and your body tissues. But sometimes the immune system kind of gets out of control and it doesn't function the way it should. And this malfunction is what you see in autoimmune diseases and chronic fatigue. So what is an autoimmune disease? Well, an autoimmune disease is your immune system attacks healthy body tissue, and it results in various basically unpleasant symptoms. It really depends on what body parts affected, but some examples of autoimmune disease include multiple sclerosis, systemic lupus, pernicious anemia, Graves' disease, and inflammatory bowel disease. Now, the cause of autoimmune disease is somewhat unclear, but some of the factors that contribute to it are genetics, diet, chemical exposure, medications, things that alter the normal microbiome of your gut really seem to play a role. There also is certain kind of hidden infections that can also increase your risk of developing some autoimmune diseases. In fact, there's some scientific evidence that links autoimmune disease with these infections that was discovered over a century ago. So the first thing I want to talk about is chronic fatigue. So this disorder is characterized by extreme fatigue and tiredness, and that really can't be explained by any other underlying medical condition. The fatigue may worsen with physical or mental activity, but it doesn't go away with rest. So the cause really of chronic fatigue is not fully understood, but there are some theories that basically think it may be attributed to some hidden infections. Chronic fatigue produces symptoms similar to many other health conditions, so it can really be a challenging disease to diagnose. And often the diagnosis really involves just ruling out other causes of fatigue. So autoimmune disease and hidden infections. So an autoimmune disease essentially means that your immune system is malfunctioned. So your immune system will start to produce immune responses that cause your body to attack its own tissue. Now, some hidden infections can make you more susceptible to an autoimmune disease, especially if you already have some other risk factors. But many of these infections can remain active and undetected for years or even decades. And furthermore, they are often ignored or overlooked as the cause of the autoimmune disease. However, science has been able to identify these infections and possibly triggers for the autoimmune disease. So for instance, autoimmune disease like multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, thyroiditis, these have been linked to chronic bacterial and viral diseases. Now, scientists are not entirely sure the exact mechanism by which infections trigger or worsen autoimmune disease, but there's basically three kind of prominent theories. And the first one is what's called the molecular mimicry. And this is basically the structure of the bacteria or virus is similar enough to your body tissue that your immune system may be unable to differentiate between the two. So it starts to attack body tissues alongside the infection. The next theory is bystander activation. And here your tissues are being invaded by the infection, whether it's a virus, bacteria, or fungi, and really the causes collateral damage by your immune system to surrounding tissue in an effort to fight off the infection. Last theory is something called cryptic antigens. And really what happens here is some viruses will hijack your cell's DNA, really in a bid to try to hide it from your immune system. But eventually your immune system can detect the virus and attacks it, but also in doing so, it also will attack the cells that it's hiding in. So this is some theories on how we develop autoimmune disease. So chronic fatigue, as we already talked about, is this fatigue that can't be explained by other things. But one of the things that concerned about is that there may be hidden infections that are leading to chronic fatigue. In fact, there's a significant cause of chronic fatigue and brain fog for many people are these potential hidden infections. So, there's studies that involve patients with no apparent reason for chronic fatigue that found pathological stimulation of the immune system, and many of these patients also tested positive for antibodies, usually seen in autoimmune disease. So, kind of you're seeing that these autoimmune disease, there may be some relationship to these hidden infections. But unfortunately, these infections are often overlooked, or the wrong tests are ordered, which may, come back negative even. And this can cause your doctor to tell you that you're okay, or simply you're imagining things. The important thing you understand is often these infections won't kill you, but they can seriously impair the quality of your life. They're often wrongly diagnosed as fibromyalgia, depression, a different autoimmune disease in adults. And so, some of the symptoms may indicate a hidden infection, such as muscle aches and pains, leg or foot pain with no injury, strange rashes or marks on your skin, and fatigue that isn't relieved by rest or sleep, and just kind of that general feeling lousy for no apparent reason, sore throat or flu-like symptoms that comes and goes, headaches and trouble thinking clearly or remembering things, joint pain without swelling that moves around from time to time with the different joints. Now, children can also suffer from these hidden infections, but they're often or sometimes wrongly labeled as behavioral problems or attention deficit disorder. So you really should, ensure that you're working with your physician if you have any of these symptoms, or your child has any of these symptoms, to really make the right diagnosis. So your child's suffering from low energy, unusual sensory issues, trouble concentrating in school, leg, knee, or foot pain without injury, or even sudden onset of obsessive compulsive symptoms. These would all be things to consider as exhibiting potential hidden infection. So, why some people experience fatigue and others don't after an infection? Well, this appears to be somewhat of a genetic difference in how their bodies respond to the infection and inflammation. So, for people that develop chronic fatigue after a hidden infection, their immune system really responds more robust to the pathogens and really has a massive production of various infection fighting agents. And this can really make the severity of the immune response to the infection much more intense. The infection also activates a vicious cycle of basically a surge of infection fighting agents that keep on going unrelenting in these susceptible individuals, thus contributing to inflammation, depression, and fatigue. So it's kind of an over response of the immune system. So we keep talking about these hidden infections. So what are some of the hidden infections, and what are links to autoimmune disease and chronic fatigue? Well, the first one is Epstein-Barr virus, or EBV. So EBV is commonly associated with infectious mononucleosis, or mono as we most often refer to it. This virus is so common that you probably already contracted this virus without being diagnosed with mono. For instance, 95% of all American adults have contracted EBV by the age of 40, but it's often misdiagnosed as a flu or strep throat. Now, research has linked this virus to chronic fatigue and several autoimmune diseases, including lupus, multiple sclerosis, Graves' disease. In fact, meta-analysis of over 20 studies found Epstein-Barr virus present in every patient with multiple sclerosis. Furthermore, there's high levels of Epstein-Barr virus antibodies, and this seems to predict the onset and flare-ups of multiple sclerosis symptoms. So there's some type of relationship with the Epstein-Barr virus. Another type of infection is herpes simplex virus, or HSV, types 1 and 2. These are the viruses that are responsible for cold sores and genital herpes. So many people contract HSV without really even actually getting sick. For instance, our surveys show that 58% of Americans have one or both types, but most don't show any symptoms. Now, HSV can remain dormant in your body for years until toxic chemical exposure or stress sets it off. This can trigger a worsening autoimmune disease or chronic fatigue. Another well-known infection is Lyme disease and tick-borne those diseases. So these diseases are another major, often overlooked factor in autoimmune disease. So Lyme disease basically is often accompanied by other problematic co-infections. So that's why we talk about tick-borne diseases, because it's often from a tick that you develop Lyme disease. So, in Lyme disease, research has found that joint autoimmune disease often occurs following Lyme disease. So isolated joints are seen to be getting destroyed by autoimmune, and it may travel from joint to joint. But really, to further complicate things, the symptoms can be very vague. So it's often misdiagnosed or missed in patients with autoimmune disease and chronic fatigue, and really as symptoms overlap with other health issues. So this is called the great mimicker, or the great imitator, in that it can be really difficult to diagnose because there's so much overlap in how it can present. What are some other common bacterial infections? Well, bacterial infections like H. pylori, chlamydia pneumonia, Klebsiella, Prevotella, these have all been linked to certain autoimmune conditions. E. coli has also been linked to just general autoimmune. Other infections such as hepatitis C, cytomegalovirus, campylobacteria, Kawasaki virus, human herpes virus, mold, chronic fungal infections, mumps, measles, rubella. These have all been linked to chronic fatigue and autoimmune disease, such as rheumatoid arthritis, myocarditis, type 1 diabetes, myasthenia gravis. So, the important thing, though, to understand is that getting any of these infections does not necessarily mean you're going to develop an autoimmune disorder or chronic fatigue. That really is one of the issues here. Is it's not well understood why people can get these infections and not have any problem, whereas other people do get these infections and have a lot of problems. And it's thought that there's probably some other genetic predisposition that involves developing these conditions. So it's not just get this infection, you have it, but there's other factors in play. Well, so how do you manage these things? Well, first off is, your doctor can run some tests for these different types of pathogens that are linked to chronic fatigue and autoimmune disease, and then treat them appropriately if found. But it's important to note that these underlying infections can be very difficult to diagnose. So, for example, Lyme disease can cause heart failure, but the detection is not as simple as doing a blood test. It actually requires a heart muscle biopsy. And there's a study that found 20% of the people with heart failure had Lyme DNA upon their heart muscle biopsy, but 2/3 of those had a negative blood test for Lyme disease. So this is just an example of kind of the difficulty in diagnosing these things. So other things that's important to understand, though, that these hidden infections may not necessarily respond to conventional treatments. So, for example, again, Lyme disease, traditional treatments really is a 3-week regimen of doxycycline. However, this may not work for everyone. So it's really important that you're working with your physician as you're investigating these things, and if you find them, on making sure that the treatment is going to work or is working for you. So kind of wrapping it all up, there's many people that suffer for years. They'll visit multiple doctors without really ever getting a diagnosis of the underlying cause of their autoimmune disease or fatigue. But the important thing is you don't have to lose all hope, because, when it comes to manage your health, you really can be very, very much an advocate for yourself. So working with your doctor, discussing what these things might be, what could be causing this underlying symptoms, and then also what type of testing is important to understand. But again, you need to understand that diagnosing these things can be a real challenge, because, as I already said, the symptoms can be very vague and very kind of prolonged and kind of hidden. So it can be a real challenge for you. Now, the one thing we do know in the kind of autoimmune disease category, that what you're eating can have a big impact. Like we talked about, your microbiome has a huge impact in how your immune system responds. So, well-balanced, healthy foods, not the high fructose containing sugars, those types of things, but really, whole food, natural foods are what you should also be doing. And then in addition to that, exercise has been found to be very helpful. So again, a little unique perspective on some things you might want to consider in your health and wellness journey. But again, these are things that you should consider if you're having problems with kind of these chronic pains or fatigued all the time. Anyway, I hope you find this helpful. And remember, this is your health and your wellness, so you've got it. Thank you.